Hi, it's me, Ingrid INFP, and I'm making this video and there are people passing by and I keep getting distracted, but anyway, we're making this video whether other people like it or not. I'm going to put myself a little bit more into the sun. There. So I wanted to talk about being a perceiver type in the MBTI scale. Now, according to how you define it, I guess that I would be a perceiver only in the MBTI and not in the actual sense of the word, because introverts are the opposite of the extrovert counterparts in the way that the functions, the cognitive functions, are put in the MBTI's cognitive factor model. So an extrovert type, their first function, if it's FE or TE, which is extroverted feeling, extroverted thinking, as their primary function, their first function, their strongest function, then that would make them a judger, right? And extroverted, a perceiving type would have any extroverted intuition or extroverted sensing as their first function, their strongest function. So that makes sense, right? But if you're an introverted type, then your first function will be introverted and would be the opposite of your type. So an INFP has P as perceiving, but their first function is actually a judging function, like FI, introverted feeling, right? So as an introvert, your judging perceiving status is determined according to your secondary, your auxiliary function, and seeing if that is, so it's the extroverted. Your first extroverted function is your auxiliary function as an introvert. If you're an INFP, your second function is NE or SE, which makes you a perceiver, even though your first function was a judging function. Same thing goes for an introverted judger, an IJ type. Their second function would be either FE or TE, which would make them judgers, but their first function is actually a perceiving function. Anyway, that was MBTI theory in a nutshell. Anyway, but so if we go through just the general dichotomy PJ, perceiving, judging, judging people sounds really bad to be a judging type, right? But the judging part is actually about wanting things to be close-ended, wanting things to have a plan, wanting things to be organized, and kind of having a vision, right, for the path of things in your life, rather than perceiving, which is very much like go with the flow, just the process rather than the destination. Way more sloppy in a way, way more messy and open-ended, and wanting to leave things, the options open, rather than closing off options too early, right? So that's kind of what perceiving means. And so you would think that the autistic brain, that does not like change, that is inflexible, that wants things to be clear and planned out and concluded upon, would fit into the stereotype of what a judger type would be, right? And you might say that ADHD might be the opposite, right? Which would be, not wanting to close off any options, having 10,000 options, just going with the flow of what's going on, being, more chill about things rather than having to plan it all out. However, there is the fact that now we know that autism and ADHD can coincide, And these aren't like things that are completely opposite to each other. And perceiving and judging, we all need to perceive and we all need to judge, or basically we all need to take in information and make decisions, right? We all need to do that in order to live a human life in the cognitive function model theory. So we all have perceiving functions and we all have judging functions, and we might prioritize them in a different way, but we all have everything, so that's kind of the thing. And also I don't think that it's completely true that autistic people are organized or are want things to be planned out every second. That's more a sign of like being stressed out and having to deal with all that in order to control your environment, because otherwise you can't deal with the stress of overwhelm of the current environment. Sorry, I really can't deal with those birds. Okay. And ADHD people sometimes really thrive under structure. They really need and want that structure. They just have a hard time creating it for themselves, So these aren't like dichotomies and opposites, We all need a little bit of both. It's just, I think that autistic people are more likely to be introverted in the MBTI scale of things. So it would make sense that we're a little bit more nuanced in our presentation, as introverts in the MBTI are more subtle in if they're perceivers or judgers compared to extroverts. Extroverts is quite clear if they're like judging types or perceiving types. While for introverts, since everything is hidden, the first function is introverted, so it's not apparent to people in the same way as extroverted functions are. What you will see with, the first extroverted function is the auxiliary function, which isn't the number one, right? So you could mix up, like you could confuse an INFJ for an INTJ. You could confuse an INFP with an INFJ, right? If you didn't know. You could confuse an INTP with an INTJ. That's quite a common thing. However, I guess that it's not as common to confuse, an ESFJ with an ESFP. They're quite different. Or maybe that's just me. I just find it easier to see things when it comes to extroverted types. It's just that it's way more clear when you see extroverted types in action. Well, introverted functions are just so difficult to know unless you really know the person deeply. So an INFJ might really look like they're keeping an open mind. They're very open-minded people, right? And quite flexible in their ideas and certain ways of being. And INFPs might be very close-minded in certain aspects, they might be very stuck onto their ideals and their values. And so it gets a little bit tricky compared to extroverted types, where it's like more clear cuts that they are clearly in the perceiving or in the judging camp. There are a lot of INTPs who like to, make decisions. And I don't think that is their favorite thing to do, though. They like to explore different avenues. But people have a tendency to lump in certain things together. So they will often lump in thinking, right, with judging. And they will often put feeling with perceiving, because thinking and judging are seen as more hard cut, while feeling will seem more woo-woo, you know, when really both thinking and feeling are judging functions, you know. And the same goes for intuition versus sensing. It seems like intuition is more geared towards being perceiving, and sensing is more geared towards being clear cut. It's a little bit less of that kind of idea among the MBTI community, but it does seem to lend to those kinds of patterns. Now, where does autism and ADHD come into this? I don't really know, but this is a completely different framework, right? So you could technically have a person of any type be autistic, and any type might be autistic, and any autistic person might be of any type, right? Same thing goes for ADHD. And it's just I do want to keep things open-ended. At the same time, it just frustrates me to no end, you know? And I am really messy, but I would like things to be organized, or things are organized in my mind but not in my external environment, really. But I am pretty logical in a way. I don't know, it's just hard to mesh those two ideas of being both a perceiver and an autistic person, you know, and being you know, being flexible when the autism criteria is being inflexible. And you know, I do like a plan, but at the same time I don't like spending all my time planning. Sometimes I just go with the flow, and the thing is, I'm not the kind of person who has a 5-year plan. Like, I really don't. I need to do plans because other people ask them of me, you know. And in order to commit to anything, that's really hard for me, committing to anything. But in order to commit to anything, it takes so much hesitation out of me before I can commit to anything. So I don't. In general, I just don't do things because I don't want to commit to anything. I also can see 10,000 different possibilities out of every scenario that I'm in, which kind of also goes against this kind of rigid thinking and lack of imagination that certain autistic people have. I don't really relate to that. I can see 10,000 ways that things could be true or not true. It's also, you know, I guess autism is linked to this perception that you can't be a feeler if you're autistic. But that's a topic for another video. We're talking about perceiving versus judging. It's just like every MBTI test is like I score INFP, you know, so I score perceiving. But at first, when I first got into the MBTI, I was at school. I was in high school. Oh, there's a bird there. Okay, that was the bird. Okay, so I was at school, so I prioritized, I was working on, I was masking, and I was like into TE, like I had to do the TE stuff. I had to be good at organizing and all that. So I actually scored INFJ and ISFJ on my first MBTI tests. And then I started realizing, well, actually my life is a mess. And so I'm an INFP. But that's because, I do use both. And it depends on what you're focused on at the moment and what you think that your identity is. So I thought that I was a certain person that maybe I really wasn't. And once I found the label that worked, I realized, oh yeah, okay. But there was a part of me that liked this judger aspect, that actually it fit me quite well. And I think that I am pretty principled as a person, I guess. And that goes into the autism stereotype. But none of us are stereotypes of our type, and none of us are stereotypes of what an autistic person is, because there isn't. We are all different. We're all on the spectrum, so you can't really be a stereotype of yourself. You're just you, and then if it happens to fit into a stereotype, then so be it. It just happens to be that way, but it's not your fault, But it's just like kind of frustrates me that I can't wrap my head around being a perceiver type and being autistic. And I think that that's kind of what led to my initial resistance at getting an autism diagnosis. And I thought that I had ADHD and not autism. When really my INFP was counterbalancing my autism, and my perceiving nature was what I saw as being ADHD, because my autistic brain does not like that INFP part of my brain. The perceiving part of my brain, and my perceiving part of my brain really does not like the autistic part of my brain. So I sound like I'm similar to all those people who are ADHD, who have both ADHD and autism, but I don't fit the criteria of ADHD, and I actually never have. And that's hard for me to accept, but it's because the perceiver part of the INFP-ness is so deeply ingrained in how I am and how I function. But my autism is also so deeply ingrained that I was born a walking contradiction. And that's something that I've been talking about all the time. INFPs have always been walking contradictions, whether they have autism or not. And so the perceiving part of me is at war endlessly, but also working together. They're at war, but they're at the same time not. They are, there's the INFP part of my brain who is so frustrated at my autism part of my brain for wanting to eat the same breakfast every morning. My INFP part of the brain is like, yeah, let's try something new and everything. And let's look at different possibilities. And then there's, the autism, which is like, no, we need to eat the same thing every day. And it's like, then my autism part of my brain is like, why are you spending your time daydreaming when you should be finishing this certain task? And this story is not actually making any sense. These kinds of things, these kinds of discussions that I have between myself, it's frustrating because nothing gets done, because everything is just a struggle all the time. But I do like the fact that it does give me a sort of balance, Without the autistic part of my brain, I wouldn't have been able to get through medical school. But without the INFP part of my brain, I wouldn't have been able to make it out my front door. You know, I need those different parts in order to like function. I've just realized that the window into the library has been open, so people have been listening to me this whole time. But anyway, so I'm just saying that it is possible to be a perceiving type and to be autistic. These things are not opposites. However, they can go against each other and make life difficult, but they can also counterbalance each other in some way. I think a lot of people have made videos about autism and ADHD, how they can interact. Apparently I don't have ADHD. Somehow I still am a little bit iffy on that point, but the thing is that the INFP part of me is not a disability and it's not a diagnosis. So I should be leaning a little bit more into being a good INFP rather than leaning too much onto my autistic self. However, it is a disability for a reason. It's just that, so I need to have that routine, I need to have all these things, the sameness, but it's not, becoming more autistic is not my path for growth. My path for growth is becoming more like a good INFP, right? Whatever that looks like, you know, is being a good person by honoring my preferences and being, you know, a fully realized self. I thought that Dana Anderson made a really good point about the mask and all that, that the mask doesn't need to be about taking away parts of yourself. It can also be about creating new bricks instead of taking away things. So I don't need to disrespect the autistic part of myself, but I can incorporate what an INFP autistic person looks like. I can add new, you know, extroverted intuition, in, you know, spontaneous ideas and excitement into my life. But in order to do that, I need to, you know, be nice to my autistic self, be nice to my INFP self, and then the pathway for growth is through the perceiving part of me. It's just that I can't go too much too far all at once, because that is overwhelming to my autistic self. So I need to just like inject certain different perceiver things into my daily life, very small amounts, but you know, just so that it's there, and that will make me grow and become you know, my perceiver self. Because yeah, so I cannot make a 5-year plan, but what I can do is that I can, you know, make each day a little bit different, make things a little bit more fun, see the beauty in things in life, and take each day as it comes, enjoy the process, right? That's the whole thing, is enjoying the process, not just sticking to the rules, and being in the world of ideas, of you know, where things are not clear cut and don't make sense, and embracing that. You know, the world is nonsense, just it doesn't need to be a path, a route that I need to walk on. It's a whole park, it's a whole sand place, so you can just wander around, right? And it's the wandering that is so exciting and fun. And it's the wandering that will teach you things and will make me have a richer life, rather than following certain decisions, certain plans. So in the overarching thing of my life, everything is just a little bit serendipity, rather than just like, okay, this is what I do, you know. And I think that is really compatible with living an holistic life. But it doesn't seem so apparently on the surface. So yeah, tell me what you guys think about my MBTI ramblings, my autism ramblings. And yeah, have a great day, everybody. Bye.